head towards the 7th chapter of Vistas. Evans tries an O-level by Colin Dexter. Let's see what it has to say. But before we move on, as always, let us know a little about the author. Norman Colin Dexter, OBE, OBE as in the Officer of the Order of the British Empire. Better known as Colin Dexter, the British crime writer of the Inspector Morse series of novels. Now, he was a crime writer, all about crime. So yes, if you are a crime lover, you're going to enjoy this story. He was presented with the OBE, that is, he was given this title, Officer of the Order of the British Empire, for services to literature by Prince Charles at Buckingham Palace on 27th October 2000. So that's nearly 20 years back. But yeah, he just passed away. That's 3 years back. Till then, yes, he was a very good writer. And what did he write? Let's go towards the plot. Evans Tries an O-Level is about a cunning prisoner. Cunning, get the word. Cunning prisoner. Evans, who makes a plan to escape from the prison, please get this line, on the day of his German language O-level exam. We all know what is an O-level exam, the beginner's level, right? So he was planning to escape. He planned an escape on the day as a prisoner he was giving an exam. But given that Evans has already escaped from the prison multiple times, the jail authorities are trying to cover up any sort of risk. Now, they are very well aware that Evans has already escaped multiple times, many times from the jail before. So, on the day of his exam, the jail authorities made sure that everything, all the risk has been taken care of. He should not escape. The question is, will he be able to succeed in his escape? He had planned it, but did he succeed or not? Let's know about it. Yes, let's talk about the characters of the story. The Secretary of the Examinations Board, the Governor of HM Prison, Oxford, James Evans, a prisoner, Mr. Jackson, a prison officer, Mr. Stephens, a prison officer, the Reverend S. McLeary, an invigilator, Mr. Carter, Detective Superintendent, Mr. Bell, Detective Chief Inspector. Now, all the vocabulary that you see, you talk of the prison officer, invigilator, detective. So, yes, all the expected characters in a crime story. Here we go. All precautions, now that's the first scene. All precautions have been taken to see to it that the O-level German examination arranged in the prison for Evans does not provide him with any means of escape. All precautions, as in all measures, had been taken to prevent his escape from the jail when he was giving his O-level, as in the ordinary level, the beginner's level German examination. He wanted to learn German, the language. So yes, he was giving that examination in the prison itself. It was in early March when the Secretary of the Examinations Board received the call from Oxford Prison. So an officer, the chief of the Oxford Prison, calls up the Secretary of the Examination Board and tells him, look, we want to conduct an exam. So let's look at their conversation. Let's go through it. It's a slightly unusual request. Now, the secretary is a little, he finds it very strange. It's a very strange thing. Governor, he tells the governor, the chief of the prison, the governor also means the chief. So he tells him, but I don't see why we shouldn't try to help. He says, okay, I know it's very strange for us to conduct an examination in your prison, but then I don't find any reason why we shouldn't. We should always give it a try. If someone wants to actually work on their language, they want to learn something, we should never stop them. We should encourage them. So the secretary was in for it. Just the one fellow, you say? So are you telling me that only one prisoner is going to give that exam? And so the governor tells him, that's it, chap called Evans. He says, yes, the chap, as in a very friendly way, to talk about a man. So a chap called Evans. He started night classes in O-level German last September. He started learning in, during last September. He says he's dead keen as in he's very, very determined to get some sort of academic qualification. Academic as in an educational completion of a course. So yeah, he wanted to learn the German language and he wanted to complete that with a degree. So yes, he said, I'm definitely in for it. I want to learn it very, very well. Is he any good? Now the secretary has a little doubt, obviously because he's a prisoner. So he says, has he really prepared well? Is he really well done? He says he was the only one in the class. So you can say he's had individual tuition all the time really. He says he was the only one prisoner learning that language. And so he's got, a very personalized touch. The teacher has been teaching him. It's like a one-to-one basis. And we are all aware when we get that one-to-one attention, how better we perform. Would have cost him a packet if he'd been outside. He says it would have definitely cost him a lot of money. The fees are really very high. He would have to pay a lot of money had he been outside the prison. But yes, within the prison, obviously, he won't be paying those fees. Well, let's give him a chance, shall we? He says, I think, let's, think of giving him that chance. That's jolly kind of you. That's really good of you. That's really nice of you to have, to have agreed to my request. What exactly is the procedure now? He tells him, okay. So now he's asking the secretary, the governor of the prison. He says, okay, so now how do we go about? What is the procedure? What are the formalities? He says, don't worry about that. The secretary is telling him, I'll be sending you all the forms and stuff. I'll be sending you everything. What's his name, you say? Evans? He says, that's the name you told me, right? The one who wants to give the exam? Evans? He says, yes. James Roderick Evans. It sounded rather grand. He says, wow, the name really sounds a very dignified name. But alas, he's in the prisoner. He's in the prison as a prisoner. Just one thing, Governor. Now the secretary has one doubt to clear because, it is a very strange request. Maybe he had not even ever conducted such an exam or any exam in a prison ever before. So he wants to clarify one doubt. He is not a violent sort of fellow, is he? Is he very destructive? Is he the one he might attack or something like that? Is he of that type? I don't want to know his criminal record or anything like that. But now, before he could complete, he says, look, I am not interested in what his background is and why is he there. I'm not interested in his criminal record. But he won't attack, will he? So he wanted to clear that doubt. No, there's no record of violence. The governor tells him, quite a pleasant sort of chap. Pleasant as in is very friendly type of chap, very likable. They tell me, bit of a card really. Bit of a card as in a little mischievous. Now see, these are very good phrases coming to you, so you should also use them. Yeah, so bit of a card really as in he's a little mischievous. Now come on, little bit here and there even you and I do, don't we? So that's fine, that's a normal thing. In fact, if we don't, we are abnormal. Yes. So yes, one of the stars at the Christmas concert. Now he was one of the stars. He was one of those performers at the Christmas musical performance. He did a very good performance. In fact, he was like a star over there. Imitations, the sort of thing, Mike Yarwood stuff. Now, Mike Yarwood is a comedian, right? So he said, he was copying him and he was imitating him. So he was doing it very, very well. Very good. Like, they do that witty. They're very witty types. These comedians, they have clever humor. Witty as in you have humor which is really clever, which is really fun, to watch and enjoy. No, he's just a congenital kleptomaniac. That's all. Now, this paragraph is actually describing how the prisoner Evans is, his characteristic basically. So he says now the problem is, you know what, he's a congenital kleptomaniac. That's it. What do you mean by congenital? By birth. And kleptomaniac, he has the urge to steal. So the problem with him is that since birth, he's had this problem. It is an inherited, it is there in him by default. So sort of something which he cannot do until and unless he goes through some counseling or stuff, but he has that urge to steal. He somehow just wants to keep stealing. Now, like you must have come across certain friends, maybe, God forbid, maybe not friends, maybe some people, or maybe you must have even heard about it. There are certain students, like you must have experienced during your schooling years, though they come from a wealthy background, you know, from a very rich background, yet they somehow land up, you know, taking your costly pen or something out of your, you know, stationery or anything. They have that urge to steal. Now, the problem is, it's not their problem. It's not something they can help it, because it is there in them since birth. So there are certain cases, you know, that are like that. The governor was tempted to add something else, but he thought better of it. Now the governor wanted to still describe him a little more, but then he kept quiet. He says, no, I think I shouldn't. He thought better of it, as in, he said, no, I don't think I should go any further. He'd look after that particular side of things himself. He said, now that other thing which he did not reveal, which he did not speak, you know, to the secretary, he says, I'll take care of that myself. I'm not going to tell him anything. That I will handle. Presumably, said the secretary, you can arrange a room where. Now, presumably, likely, but not certain, like maybe, presumably, maybe, he told the secretary, said the secretary, you can arrange a room where, and before he could end, the governor says, no problem. He's in a cell of his own, cell, jail, prison, you know, one part of the prison, that room in which they are. If you've no objections, if you have no, you know, if you have no issues with it, he can sit the exam in there. He can appear for the exam where he is, in the cell itself, in the prison, in the jail itself. Secretary is okay with it. He says, that's fine. And we could easily get one of the parsons from St. Mary Mag's to invigilate if that's. Now, he says, this governor says, look, we need somebody to invigilate, to supervise. When he's giving his exam, when he's writing his exam, we need somebody to look after, right? So, parsons here means the priest, people from the clergy. They are those people who actually work in the church, right? So, they are the people out there, they are connected to the church. So, basically one of the parsons, the priest from St. Mary Mag's, that's the church out there in England, to invigilate if that's, to supervise. So the governor tells the secretary, and the secretary is fine, yes. They seem to have a lot of parsons there, don't they? I mean, you know, in a very funny manner, he said, I mean, nothing wrong, with a good intention. He says, oh, of course, they have so many out there. The two men chuckled as in they laughed quietly, good-naturedly. They didn't have any bad intention. They didn't mean any wrong. They were okay with it. They just laughed it out. And the secretary had a final thought. He gave it a final thought. He gave it a final decision. At least there's one thing. You shouldn't have much trouble keeping him incommunicado, should you? He says, there's this one thing. I hope you have no trouble in keeping him in such a manner, incommunicado, as in you should keep him in such manner where he cannot communicate to anybody. He cannot talk with other people. The governor chuckled politely once more. Again, he gave it a silent laugh, and very politely. Reiterated his thanks. He again thanked him, and slowly cradled the phone, and slowly he placed the phone receiver in its cradle. He disconnected. He finished speaking to the secretary. Evans the Break, as the prison officers called him. Now, Evans the Break, that's a title. Evans had got this title. Why? Thrice he had escaped from the prison, and but for the recent wave of unrest. Now, so far, thrice he had escaped from the prison. But right now, currently, because there was a lot of disturbance in the maximum security buildings, there were a lot of disturbance going on towards the north, he wouldn't now be gracing the governor's premises in Oxford. Now, because of all the disturbance that was going on in those, security buildings, this time he wouldn't be gracing, as in he wouldn't be going to the governor's premises, to the governor's building in Oxford, and the governor was going to make absolutely certain that he wouldn't be disgracing them. And the governor made sure that this time Evans should not be, embarrassing them. He should not be doing such a thing. He should not be escaping. So he made sure, he took care of each and every risk that was involved that made his escape possible. Not that Evans was a real burden. Actually, Evans himself as a human was good. He was not really bad. He was not an issue. Just a persistent, nagging presence. The presence that he had, he was very stubborn type, so it was a very uncomfortable presence. His presence over there, whenever he was there, sort of uncomfortable. He'd be all right in Oxford though. He says, okay, he's fine where he is in the prison, though the governor would see to it personally. Now remember that one point he stopped, he did not tell the secretary, it was this. So he himself, personally, he was going to make sure that his presence in the jail is perfect, it is secured. And besides, there was just a possibility that Evans was genuinely interested in O-level German. Just a slight possibility, just a very slight possibility. Now, the governor just gave it a thought, like I am doing so many things, I'm covering up all the risk so that he should not run away. But maybe that, that 0.1% thought came to him that maybe he actually wants to learn the language, maybe he does not want to run away, but the possibility is only 0.1%. So the circumstances, the situations were like this, that obviously being the governor, being the chief of the prison, they could not trust the prisoners. The prisoners had broken their trust time and time again. So after that, they had literally stopped trusting them at all. At 8:30 p.m. on Monday, 7th June, Evans' German teacher shook him by the hand in the heavily guarded recreational block just across from D Wing. Now 7th June, 8:30 in the night, it's a Monday. And next day, that's a Tuesday, 8th June, is his exam, his O-level exam. So his teacher, the teacher who used to come and teach him, personally they were one-to-one. So they shook hands, he shook hands and he wished him luck because next day he was going to give his exam. So yes, he came to wish his student all the luck. Guten Glück, Herr Evans. He says, all the best. Herr means Mr. Now these are the German words. Pardon, he did not understand. What did he say? I said, good luck for tomorrow. The teacher tells him, look, I'm wishing you a good luck. Oh, thanks. I mean, Dankeschön. Now, Dankeschön, it means thank you in German. My pronunciation fluency may be a little different, but yeah, the pronunciation goes with the German natives. You haven't a cat in hell's chance of getting through, of course. But now here his sir is telling him, the German teacher who had come to teach him German was telling him that, you don't have any chance at all. Cat in hell's chance is no chance at all. You will not get through because I know you are not at all prepared. But anyways, and before he could say anything more, he tells him, Evans, I may surprise everybody, said Evans. He says, you never know, I might just surprise everyone. Now this line, according to him, was another indication. But what he thinks is, okay, he might surprise us and he might just clear the exam. But this was a very disguised statement. He meant some other surprise. So I may surprise everybody, said Evans. At 8:30 the following morning, Evans had a visitor. Two visitors, in fact. Who were they? He tucked his grubby string vest into his equally grubby trousers and stood up from his bunk. Now, what do you mean he tucked? He put it in. He put in his grubby as in his dirty string vest into his equally grubby trousers. The trousers that he was wearing were equally dirty. And he stood up from his bunk. Bunk, you know, these are those beds which are attached to the walls. You have the bunker beds, right? One above the other. Yeah, so he was there, and that's the bed generally prisoners have. So he got up from there immediately. He quickly tucked in his shirt, his string vest rather, and smiling cheerfully, "Morning, Mr. Jackson. This is indeed an honor." He tells Mr. Jackson that, "Thank you so much. You're here in front of me early this morning." Jackson was the senior prison officer on D wing, and he and Evans had already become warm enemies. What do you mean by warm enemies? They had a low enmity. They were sort of, against each other, opposing each other. So yeah, they were warm enemies, right? So they had enmity, but on a low note. Now, what happens further? At Jackson's side stood Officer Stephens. Now, next to Jackson, the senior prison officer, there also stood another officer, Stephens, a burly, surly looking man. A burly as in he was nice, heavily built, and surly means here very unfriendly, very aggressive types. So yeah, he was heavily built and he was that aggressive one, typical officer looking man. Only recently recruited to the profession. Only recently he had joined duty as a prison officer. Jackson nodded curtly. He nodded in a rude and brief manner. Who did that? Jackson. "And how's our little Einstein this morning then?" So he is actually making fun of Evans. He says, "So, how's the Einstein today?" "Wasn't he a mathematician, Mr. Jackson?" Now, just the way he, they were enemies, right? So, just the way he taunted him back. He gave it to him back. He says, "Wasn't he a mathematician, Mr. Jackson?" "I think he was a Jew, Mr. Jackson." And, it went on. Evans' face was unshaven and he wore a filthy looking red and white bobble hat upon his head. Now, he was wearing a very terrifying looking hat. It was really really bad. It was in an irregular bouncing motion. He was wearing a red and white hat on his head and he was unshaven, right? And "Give me a chance, Mr. Jackson. I was just going to shave when you bust in." He says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You're finding me a little untidy. But the thing was, I was just about to go and shave and you people came in. You people actually came in to my cell." Which reminds me, Jackson turned his eyes on Stephens. Now he said, talking to the other officer, "Make sure you take his razor out of the cell when he's finished scraping that ugly mug of his." Now he tells him, look, after he has shaved, now Evans himself reminded that I'm going to shave. So if he's going to shave, obviously the razor is with him. So immediately it strikes Jackson and he tells Stephen, look, you better do one thing. You better remove the razor out of the cell when he's finished scraping. Now here scraping means removing the unwanted hair when he was shaving indirectly. That ugly mug of his, the shave, the beard that he had. Clear? Why did he ask him to do that? You remember, they were not taking any kind of risk. So that when he gave his exam, there was no instrument or no pokey instrument or any such thing with which he could harm somebody. So that's why even the razor was to be taken. One of these days, he'll do us all a favor and cut his bloody throat. He says, one fine day, he'll actually do a favor on all of us. We are also fed up of him. He'll literally land up cutting his bloody throat. For a few seconds, Evans looked thoughtfully at the man standing ramrod straight in front of him. Now, he was listening to that. It was right in front of him when they were talking like this. So, for a few seconds, he looked thoughtfully You know at whom? At the man standing ramrod straight in front of him. Ramrod means very straight and stiff. Ramrod, literally like a particular, like a peculiar rather officer. A string of World War medals proudly paraded over his left breast pocket. Now what was it? There was a string. This man who had newly joined, who was newly recruited, he had a string of Second World War medals. You know, all the medals that they have right on top, paraded as in they were displayed, they were put up over his left breast pocket. Mr. Jackson, was it you who took my nail scissors away? Evans had always worried about his hands. Now suddenly he looked at him and he says, I can't find my nail scissors. Have you by any chance taken that away? And he's very particular about his hands. And your nail file too. He says, not only the scissors, but your nail filer also we have taken and gone. Look, for a moment, Evans' eyes smoldered dangerously, but Jackson was ready for him. Now here, Evans' eyes were really full of anger. They showed a barely suppressed emotion. He literally very dangerously, he gave that look, a very dangerous look. But Jackson was all ready for it. He was expecting it. Orders of the governor, Evans, he says, look, not of my business, but I got the order from the governor. So I had to obey it. He leaned forward and leered, his voice dropping to a harsh, contemptuous whisper. You want to complain? What do you mean by this? A very scornful thing. He told him, he leered his voice. You know, he was showing all the thing, his authority. He was actually literally pouring out all the aggressiveness on him. And he says, oh, you want to complain? You know, he gave him that tone, a very scornful one. Evans shrugged his shoulders lightly. The crisis was over. He shrugged his shoulders, he said, oh, forget it. And the crisis was over. Here, it was the time of difficulty. You've got half an hour to smarten yourself up, you know, to tidy yourself and to make yourself look really smart in appearance. Evans, and take that bloody hat off. He says, oh, smarten yourself, improve your appearance and throw that hat away. It looks terrible. Evans puts his right hand lovingly on top of the filthy woolen and smiled sadly. He literally, you know, he was sort of in love with that cap, and he just put his right hand on it and very lovingly, and somehow he gave a very sad smile because why? He did not want to, you know, take it out. Do you know, Mr. Jackson, it's the only thing that's ever brought me any sort of luck in life. He says, this is the only hat. This is the only thing I have which has ever brought any good luck to me. Kind of lucky charm. We all have some or the other lucky charm. So yes, this was his, the red and, you know, white hat. If you know what I mean. And today I thought, well, with me, exam and all that. He says, you know, for exam, we all need some lucky charm. Now, like we have this Indian custom where you people, where your mothers and, you know, your, grandparents probably, they give you some curd or some sugar or something before you step out, or you know, touch their feet. Sort of a lucky charm, you take their blessings. So yeah, anything. So for him, it was the hat. Buried somewhere in Jackson was a tiny core of compassion, and Evans knew it. He says, you know, Jackson on top, he was really, you know, hard like a coconut, but inside he was sort of soft. He was compassionate, as in he had the sympathy and concern for others. And the best part was Evans was aware of it. He knew it, and so he took that advantage. He sort of, you know, emotionally told him this, and that guy was in. Jackson was just there. Just this once then, Shirley Temple. He says, okay, fine, just this once. If there was one thing that Jackson genuinely loathed, genuinely hated about Evans, it was his long, wavy hair. Now this was it. This actress also had these long, wavy hair. So he calls him Shirley Temple because of the long, wavy hair. And yes, get shaving. Improve your appearance and get smarter and walk out. You have to go for your exam. At 8:45 the same morning, the Reverend Stuart McClary left his bachelor flat in Broad Street and stepped out briskly towards Carfax. Now, do you remember who was the Reverend Stuart McClary? He was the invigilator. He was supposed to be there, right? So, at 8:45, he started out. He left his bachelor flat. Those days, you know, he used to live all alone and everything over there itself. So, they called it the bachelor flat in Broad Street. That was where it was located. And he stepped out energetically, very briskly towards Carfax. The weatherman reported the temperatures considerably below the normal for early June. Now, the weather forecast was, okay, you know, the temperatures are going to be less than the normal, generally, which do occur in the early June. And now you see his description, what he is wearing. A long black overcoat and a shallow crowned clerical hat, it's visible there, provided welcome protection. It was a welcome and a protection. So it was ready to welcome what? The drizzle, the light rain. It had just started pouring half an hour earlier and it now spattered the thick lenses of his spectacles. Because it was drizzling, because there were light showers, he had spots of water. It was, you know, his lenses were actually covered with drops of water. So this is how they describe the invigilator. In his right hand, he was carrying a small brown suitcase. Now, what all was there in that suitcase? Which contained all that he would need for his morning duties. All the morning duties which he had to actually perform. What were they? Including a sealed question paper envelope, a yellow invigilation form, a special authentication card from the examination board. Authentication as in, you know, identification, some ID proof. So, authentication card from the examination board, a paper knife. A paper knife was a letter opener. Remember, the envelope was sealed. So, he carried that paper knife, a Bible. He was to speak to the Women's Guild that afternoon on the Book of Ruth. So, it was the guild, this is an association, the Women's Association, usually of craftsmen or merchants. He was supposed to have a discussion, a talk on, he was supposed to give a talk there in the afternoon on the Book of Ruth, and a current copy of the Church Times. Now, he was carrying all these things, the invigilator. The 2-hour examination was scheduled to start at 9:15 a.m. Now, he started at 8:45, right, from his flat, and the exam was scheduled at 9:15 a.m. Evans was lathering his face vigorously when Stephens brought in 2 small square tables and set them opposite each other in the narrow space between the bunk on one side and on the other a distempered stone wall. Now, while he was shaving, while he was lathering here his face vigorously, remember he was supposed to shave, he was doing that. So what Stephens did by then, he brought 2 small square tables and he placed them opposite each other, where in the narrow space between the that bed and the the distempered stone wall. Distempered as in it was painted with distemper. You have that chuna types, that. Next, Stephens brought in 2 hard chairs, the slightly less battered of which he placed in front of the table, which stood nearer the cell door. Now, what he did was he also brought 2, now they specifically mentioned 2 hard chairs. Prison, after all the possible torture a prisoner can get. Yeah, the slightly less battered as in damaged by age. I mean, they were very old chairs. So, which was a little better than that, he kept it in front of the table, and that came near the cell door. Jackson put in a brief final appearance. "Behave yourself, laddie," He told him, you better behave yourself. He gave him the final touch that whatever it is, you better behave yourself, young boy, laddie. Evans turned and nodded. And these, Jackson pointed to the pin-ups, to the posters, off. Move those posters off. Evans turned and nodded again. I was going to take them down anyway. A minister, isn't he? The chap coming to sit in, I mean. He says, so the one who's going to come and sit with me, is he a minister? And how did you know that? Asked Jackson quietly. He says, how do you know that? Well, I had to sign some forms, didn't I? And I couldn't help. He says, okay, when I was signing, I realized it. I saw it. Evans drew the razor carefully down his left cheek. You remember he was shaving and left a neat swath. So when he shaved it across, what was left? A strip that became clear after shaving. In the white lather, the lather that he had used, the shaving cream, after that it became nice and clean. Can I ask you something, Mr. Jackson? Why did they have to bug me in this cell? He wanted to ask Jackson one more thing. He says, can I ask you something? Why did they have to bug me? Why did they have to, conceal a miniature microphone over here? Why did they want to do that? He nodded his head vaguely to a point above the door. He had noticed that microphone. Remember, they had said, you have to make it. So he says very vaguely, very uncertain, he looks at that point above the door and says, why did they have to do that? Not a very neat job, conceded Jackson. Jackson felt, oh my God, he has already noticed it. It has not been done really nicely. So, yeah, we have done it. He actually just confessed. They are not. They don't honestly think I'm going to try to... He says, oh, so do you think they are actually still thinking that I'm going to try to... Obviously, he meant escape. They are taking no chances, Evans. Nobody in his senses would take any chance with you. He says nobody is going to take any chance with you. The way you have done in the past, you have, escaped so many times. So obviously, nobody on earth would want to take a chance with you. Not 0.1% risk they want to take with you. So yes, all these things have been done. Who's going to listen? He says, so while I'm talking, who's going to listen to what I'm going to say? And he says, I'll tell you. Who's going to listen in, laddie? It's the governor himself. See? He says, look, the governor himself is going to sit and listen to what you're talking. He don't trust you a bloody inch. He says not even a little bit, not even 0.1% he trusts you. So obviously he is going to do it himself. And nor do I. Of course, even I don't do it. I don't trust you one bit. I'll be watching you like a hawk. He says, I'll be watching you. I'm going to really observe you so closely. Even if your eye goes left or right, I am going to watch. Evans, so keep your nose clean. Keep your nose clean as in stay out of trouble. Wonderful phrases, you all must learn them. So keep your nose clean, stay out of trouble. Clear? He walked towards the door. He says, okay, fine. He gives him a final warning. You dare not get into any sort of trouble. Evans nodded. He'd already thought of that. He said, well, he had already cooked up his khichdi. And number 2, handkerchief was lying ready on the bunk. A neatly folded square of off-white linen. Off-white linen as in a little yellow or a grey tint. So there was a nice, clean, square-shaped, folded square handkerchief on his bunk. Just one more thing, Einstein. Now Jackson again, tells him one more thing. He says, he calls him Einstein. And who is he referring to, So, yeah, what's it? He says, yeah, tell me what happened. Good luck, old son. You remember, he was a very compassionate person. He had a very soft corner. He had a very soft heart, rather. So he says, good luck, old son. He's giving an exam. So he says, good luck to you. In the little lodge, just inside the prison's main gates, the Reverend S. McCleary signed his name neatly in the visitor's book. Now, in the lodge means actually the place, the meeting place, where he was supposed to go, the invigilator. Yeah. So he entered the prison's main gates, and obviously you can't just enter. So you have that book, the visitors' books, who all came, what time, what was the reason, all that he filled, and thence walked side by side with a silent prison officer. Thence, as in from a previously mentioned place, he was supposed to walk with him. So yes, he went with him side by side with a very silent prison officer across the exercise yard to D Wing, where he was greeted by Jackson. Jackson, you remember, the officer, to be more specific, whose enemy was he? Yes, Evans. The wing's heavy outer door was unlocked. Now, the outer door, it was unlocked. It was a heavy outer door and locked behind them. As they went in, it was again locked. The heavy inner door, the same. Again, there was another inner door which was equally heavy. The same thing happened. It was unlocked, it was opened, they got in and it was closed. And McClary was handed into Stephen's keeping. Now, from there, he had to join Stephens. Stephens, you remember, the newly recruited prison officer, yes, who was there with Jackson. So yeah, he was along with his escort. Get the razor, murmured Jackson. Now Jackson is asking Stephens, did you take the razor from there? Stephens nodded. He said, yes. Well, keep your eyes skinned clear. You better focus on him every second. Focus totally only on him. Keep your eyes skinned. Another beautiful phrase. Make a list, keep learning and keep using. Stephens nodded again, and McClary, his feet clanging up the iron stairs. Now what he did was, Stephens nodded again. He says, yes, I will focus on him. And McClary, his feet was clanging, as in it was making a metallic sound. So they were going up the iron staircase. So, tuck, 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 it was clanging. Followed his new guide and finally stood before a cell door where Stephens opened the peephole and looked through. There was a peephole first. He looked through. That's him, sir. He's showing it. He said, okay, he's the person. Evans, facing the door, sat quietly at the farther means the further down of the two tables. His whole attention riveted to a textbook of elementary German grammar. Now he was already sitting there, and what he did was, he was engrossed. He was, trying and revising. Like we all do the last minute revision, he was doing the same. He was the student, right then. So yeah, he was totally engrossed in the book. Which textbook? The elementary German grammar. Elementary as in the basic, because he was appearing for the basic level, right? You remember? Yeah. So Stephens took the key from its ring and the cell lock sprang back with a thudded metallic twang. Now what he did that, he took the key, okay, from the ring, he opened the lock, so it thudded, it fell with a muffled sound, metallic twang, a strong ringing sound. So you know how it is when you open the lock, what kind of sound comes, and these locks are way heavier. So yeah, it made a lot of noise. Now, it was 9:10 a.m. when the governor switched on the receiver. Switched on the receiver, you know, the microphone which was attached, yes, and which Evans had noticed. Yeah, so he got it and he switched it on. Now he wanted to hear every word what was going on. He had instructed Jackson to tell Evans of the temporary little precaution. That was only fair. As if Evans wouldn't spot it. He had already spotted it. So he told him, he said, you can tell him, you know, that's a very temporary, that thing is for a limited time we have put that microphone. But okay, it's a sort of a prevention, a sort of a precaution. But Evans was way smarter. He had already noticed it. But wasn't it all a bit theatrical? Now, it was just an exam. So what, don't you think this was all a little too extremely dramatic? It was like a drama going on. Schoolboyish almost. You know, the schoolboyish type thing you have in like a very immature fact, because the young boy. How on earth was Evans going to try anything on today? He's saying with so much tight security, how on earth would he ever even try to move from here? If he was so anxious to make another break, why in heaven's name hadn't he tried it from the recreational block? Much easier, but he hadn't. He said, see, they were trying to analyze. He said, if he really wanted to actually, escape once again, when he was going to the recreational block, when he was going for some leisure and, he was doing a few good activities over there. So if he had to actually take a break, if he had to really run rather, he would have run from there, because from there it was way easier. There were not such heavy doors like out here. But he had not tried it from there. And there he was now, sitting in a locked cell, all the prison officers on the alert, 2 more locked doors between his cell and the yard, and a yard with a wall as high as a haystack. Yes, Evans was as safe as houses. Wow. Check the tight security he was in, ultra tight security. Even a fly couldn't have moved out the way they had done it. Yeah, because they didn't want to take a chance, with him. So yeah, he was sitting in a locked cell, all the prison officers totally on the alert mode. There were 2 locked doors between his cell and the yard. Now, between the cell and the yard, there were 2 locked doors. Then a yard, another yard with a wall. Okay, as high as a haystack, very tall. And yes, Evans was as safe as house. Here he was completely secure. No chance, not even the slightest chance for him to escape. Anyway, it wouldn't be any trouble at all to have the receiver turned on for the next couple of hours or so. He says, never mind. Now, right now, I have to keep the receiver on, and it may be on for an hour or 2, but that's okay, not a problem. It wasn't as if there was going to be anything to listen to, was it? He says, there wasn't really anything interesting as such to listen to anyways. Amongst other things, an invigilator's duty was to ensure that the strictest silence was observed. Now, what was the invigilator's duty? It was to ensure, he wanted to make sure that the strictest silence, not even, it was like a pin drop silence, that much silence had to be taken care of. But still that little nagging doubt, everything was taken care of. But still, they had, that doubt which was harassing constantly, that what if he escapes? What if he escapes? How will he do it? Constantly going on. Might Evans try to take advantage of McClary? You think he's going to take advantage of him? Now, the governor was not at all in peace. His mind kept coming up with different doubts. And so, he was not at rest at all. He was totally on the alert mode. Get him to smuggle in a chisel or 2 or a rope ladder, or now he says, you know what, get him to smuggle, move illegally or secretly into a chisel, that's a long bladed hand tool, or a rope ladder, 2 long ropes connected by multiple cross pieces. Now, this is what he told him. He says, you think he could escape in such manners? He could probably get through that or go through a rope ladder. He kept getting all kinds of doubts. The governor sat up sharply. Now the time had begun. Now that moment had come when they all had to be full focus on him. He sat up sharply, dramatically. It was all very well getting rid of any potential weapon that Evans could have used. But what about McClary? He said, see, all instruments, whatever possible instruments, you remember the razor, the nail scissor, the nail file, all the pointed things which he could have probably used, to help him escape. Everything was out of his cell. Nothing was in his cell. But there was a human in his cell. McClary was there. Would he use him to escape? What if quite unwittingly, the innocent McClary had brought in something himself? He says, well, unwittingly, maybe unknowingly, the innocent, McClary did not know anything. He was pretty innocent. He was not guilty of anything. So he says maybe he could have brought in something himself. A jackknife, perhaps, a jackknife, knife with a folding blade. You have that knife with the folding blade, that small thing, that's called a jackknife. And what if Evans held him hostage with such a weapon? He says maybe, McClary has carried something like a jackknife, and who knows, Evans is quite capable. He might just, hold him hostage, a person seized for fulfillment. He might just, hold his neck like this and tell him, okay, move me out of this, otherwise I kill you. So he was a poor innocent soul. What he had done, but Evans was capable of doing anything. The governor reached for the phone. It was 9:12 a.m. It's like a tick-tock, 9:15 the exam was supposed to start. The examinee and the invigilator had already been introduced by Stephens. Now, who was the examinee? The person taking an exam or a test. So basically, when you give your exam, your teacher who's invigilating is the examiner and you are the examinee, right? So the ones who are taking exams. So they both had been introduced by Stephens. They both got to know each other's name. When Jackson came back and shouted to McClary through the cell door, "Can you come outside a minute, sir?" "You too, Stephens." Now, who was inside? Stephens was in, McClary was in, and Evans was in. Three of them were in. So Jackson, he just calls from the door. He asks him to come out. He calls the invigilator out. Jackson quickly explained the governor's worries, and McClary patiently held out his arms at shoulder level whilst Jackson lightly frisked his clothes. Now, they had a doubt, maybe unknowingly, he has carried something and which, Evans could use to escape. So what he did was, he said, see, the governor is worried, so we want to frisk you again. So McClary patiently, very coolly, he said, okay, fine, not a problem. He held out his arms at shoulder level, that's how we generally do, while Jackson lightly frisked his clothes. When are you people frisked? When you enter the theatre, right? They frisk you. That's one of the places. Many more. Something hard here, sir. He spotted something hard. Reading glasses, replied McClary, looking down at the spectacle case. He says, oh, they are my reading glasses. That's what you found hard over there. Jackson quickly reassured him and, bending down on the landing thumb, flicked the catches on the suitcase. He reassured him. He says, okay, let's remove those doubts. Let's just do that. And bending down on the landing thumb, flicked the catches, as in the device to secure something. He flicked them on the suitcase. He picked up each envelope. These are the catches of the suitcase. He picked up each envelope in turn, carefully passed his palms along their surfaces and seemed satisfied. He even opened his suitcases. His suitcase which he was carrying, he flicked open the catches. This is what you see, the catch, right? And he put his hand over every surface of the envelope and they were like, it's okay, there's nothing. He riffled cursorily through a few pages of Holy Writ and vaguely shook the church times. All right, so far. Everything, you remember all that was in his bag, he had carried with himself. So he riffled cursorily. He riffled as in he searched through very quickly, very fast, through a few pages of Holy Writ. Remember, he was carrying the church times. He was also carrying the Bible, and vaguely shook the church times. Just like that, he shook the church times. All right, nothing so far. But one of the objects in McClary's suitcase was puzzling him sorely. Now, you remember, he was carrying a sealed envelope, a sealed question paper envelope. With that, you remember, he had also carried that knife to open the envelope. So there was that one thing which was puzzling. It was causing a confusion, a lot of confusion. There was this one thing which, one of those objects which was actually causing a lot of confusion there. And what was it? How would it be used? What would happen next? Let's watch